Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Rob and Claus. Thanks for joining me here. I'm John Scott. Of course, I appreciate the support and the listens. We're going to have a big one today. People have been inundating me with messages. I appreciate the support. I appreciate the effort to send me emails and messages and this and that and YouTube comments. I read them all. I try to respond to all of them. There are quite a few, so don't be offended if I don't respond. And I've been getting some good feedback. People saying, I enjoy this, I don't enjoy that. We miss Tim. We're glad Tim's gone. There's quite a few comments like that. So I'm sifting through them. I'm trying to adjust the show. What I have gotten a lot of positive feedback on is the deep dives. I've done a few to date, and I think overwhelmingly across the board, the people enjoy when I really focus in and hone in on one team instead of doing just a free for all and throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. So I'm going to continue to do that. And today we're going to, in honor of my former co-host, we're going to do the Boston Bruins. And, maybe this would have been hard if Tim was here because he's a very passionate fan and supporter of the Bruins, and it's hard to see through the blinds when you're that close to the chaos that is the Boston Bruins over the last 20 some years. But that's what we're going to get into. Another comment that I've gotten is people enjoy a little personal talk. They want to know what's going on in my life, not to a crazy extent. We keep it short, succinct. So here we are. I'm going to give you a little update on my life. My house is done. I built it. It's fantastic. We've been living in it for the last month now. And as with all projects, things arise where you look back and you go, man, I wish I would have done that. And I had a big boner of a mess up where, and it might get a little complicated, but just stay with me. So I have a 250 amp wire running to my house, the power service to my house. I ran that to my panel. But I have two sub panels that run off of that main panel because it makes things easier for wiring and that sort of thing. I have a sub panel that goes to my boiler, and that just powers the boiler, the pumps, and everything that's boiler related. So if I want to work on that, I can just turn off the sub panel. I don't have to worry about getting electrocuted. Mind you, I've been electrocuted so many times in the last month and a half, either at my former house because I'm trying to fix that up to rent it, or my current house because I was trying to obviously do the electricity and that, electrical and that. No word of a lie, I've probably been zapped a dozen times in the last 5 months. Not terrible. Some of them worse than others where you connect to two poles and it knocks you off the ladder. Other times it's just a one pole and it's just a little zap, a little bee sting. All that aside, going back to the issue, I have a second sub panel on the other side of my house. I have a long house. I don't have a huge house, but it's a longer house. I think it's 100 some feet long. So I took one run of 50 amp wire to my sub panel, not thinking, by the way. I'm just like, okay, I'll have a sub panel over here, do that side of the house. I'll have my main panel here. That'll handle most of the things. As plans progress and as we're building the house and as I'm doing the wiring, I am running the majority of my appliances to my sub panel, not thinking because I'm an idiot. And so we drywall, we get everything buttoned up, we start plugging things in. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, okay, what happened one day? Everything just breaks. The breaker for the sub panel just goes, it pops. I mean, that's weird. I don't think too much of it. And then it happens again. And I'm like, whoa, that's not good. And so I sit down and I actually think about things and I go, okay, I'm running all electric. I don't have natural gas. And so I'm running my dryer, my washer, my electric water heater, my induction stove, my dishwasher, my everything in the kitchen, and everything to do with laundry is running off of that one panel. And mind you, the stove is a 40 amp. The electric water heater is a 40 amp. The dryer is a 50 amp. The dishwasher is a certain amperage. Everything adds up. And the panel is only a 50 amp panel. And so one of those appliances on its own caps out that panel. And so I'm just like, well, okay, they're not all 40. Some are 30, some are 20. But it adds up pretty quick. So I have almost 100 amps going to that panel. I'm like, damn it. And so it's popped 2 or 3 times. And all you have to do, you go to the main breaker and you just reset the fuse. But still, it's an issue where the fridge as well. If it pops when you're not there, the fridge goes down. Or if it pops and you're in the middle of Christmas dinner and you're cooking a turkey and you don't realize it and the stove stops working and you're like, oh my gosh, like the turkey's not done. And so I have to fix that. And to do that, I'm just going to run another 50 amp line to that panel. And I'm going to take the existing 50 amp. No, I'm going to run a 100 amp line to that panel. And I'm going to take the existing 50 amp line that's there. I'm just going to connect it directly to my stove. So I should remove the stove and I'll have an upgraded service to that panel and all should be good. But again, to do this, I have to bury a wire from my initial main panel. We're going to go outside with it. So you have to do conduit and you have to do all this rigmarole where you're coming down and you got to bury it 18 inches and you got to come up and into the sub panel through the back of the panel. It's just a lot of work. And it's just a pain because I've already done it and you got to spend a couple more $1,000 to do this. So I don't know. It's just that's the update. Everything, the chickens, people care more about the chickens than they care about me. So the update on the kitchen, the chickens they're doing great. They're laying eggs. We're trying to buy more, but I just can't seem to find a supplier to supply me with started pullets. And a pullet is a female chicken that's of age, so to speak. And she's already laying or on the verge of laying. She's not a chick because it takes a lot of time for these little chicks to grow up to lay eggs. Typically, I want to say 10 months at the early age, and then a year, obviously, they're laying. But so I'm trying to find some pullets. So if you're in the northern Michigan area and you got some pullets you want to sell me, I'm in the market. And I'm not going to pay $35 for a chicken. I'm just saying that right now because I look around and it's like, oh, $35 for a Brazilian nut-breasted chicken. I'm like, I don't need the speckled Easter eggs. I just want some just plain eggs. I just want some egg layers. I don't need some fancy schmancy eggs. I just want my 6-egg omelet on Saturday and I want my 5 over easy on Sunday. That's all I want. So if you're in the area, I will buy those chickens from you. And I will be very happy to introduce them to my original chickens that are just doing fantastic. They're all laying 1 egg a day. The only issue is I'm trying to find a way to move my existing coop to my new house. I thought I could just throw some long forks on my buddy's tractor, but it didn't really work out that way. So now I'm kind of in a pickle where I got this big chicken coop and I don't know how to get it to my current house. My poor kid's got to walk a little bit further to get the eggs and give them water every day. Oh, my poor kids. They're so tortured. All right, that's the update. I'm by myself at my office. It's late at night. It's early in the morning. Having a whiskey. I'm having some fun. We're going to have some good interviews coming up. I've been talking to people in Slack. If you're not a member of my Patreon, I don't know what you're doing, but I've let them in on all the interviews we have lined up, and it's very exciting. Marty McSorley went over great gangbusters. I'm going to have him on again because we didn't really talk about fighting, but he's going to come on. We have some current stars that are going to come on. We have some former all-stars that are going to come on, some tough guys that are going to come on. It's very exciting. These guys are hard to nail down, but it'll be fun the next, I want to say 2 or 3 months for the show. So stay tuned. There's brighter things to come on the horizon. So here we go. We're going to get into the Boston Bruins. How did we get here? Because this is a once storied franchise. The original 6, one of the OGs who arguably, when you look at all the franchises in the NHL, they have their act together. They don't shuffle through presidents. They don't shuffle through GMs or coaches. They play the long game. And that seems to equal success for them. And it has equaled success. But based on where they were, even 15 years ago, they won the Cup in 2011, to where they are now, there's a huge chasm and a huge leap from going from 2 years ago where we are the best team in NHL history in the regular season, where you're 23 points clear of the next closest team. That's 11 wins, by the way, better than the next closest team. And that's 2 years ago. To now, as it stands, last year, they were one of the worst teams in the NHL. 28th place in 32 teams. That drop off is hard to quantify. It doesn't happen to go from the penthouse to the poorhouse in the blink of an eye. Something must have happened. And when you look at this franchise, you have to go back to 2011. Before then, obviously, they were struggling, and it reached a climax in 2011 with the Stanley Cup winning. And when Connor Clifton was on the show a few weeks back, the one thing he kept emphasizing, he obviously had a terrible tenure with the Buffalo Sabres. He's now with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But he just kept hammering on the culture in Boston, how they went about their business, that everybody held this expectation to a high standard. And it started with the players, and it trickled down from management, and everybody bought in, and everybody understood the common goal that we had, which was to win. It wasn't to make money. It wasn't to score points. It wasn't to get accolades from the NHL. It was to win, because I think they all understand, and good teams understand this after a while. When you win Stanley Cups, playoff rounds, you will find those other things eventually. And that's why it happens after every Stanley Cup champion. You win the Stanley Cup, and all the other GMs in the league look at that team and they go, ooh, I want that guy. He won a Stanley Cup. What does he have that I don't? He is a champion. He has those intangibles. So the Boston Bruins, pretty early on, at the end of the 2000s, the first decade, they understood what that culture would lead to. And they obviously got that, because they all made a ton of money. They all won awards, and all those accolades came with instilling the culture early on. And in 2008, 9, 10, 11, they built the building blocks for what we saw in all of 2000s. And it started with hard play, disciplined play, energetic play. They had a good mix of young kids and veterans. When you look at that 2011 team, there were no superstars. I know some of them progressed into being superstars, but they were a mix of young kids, skilled veterans. Tyler Seguin, that was his first season. Milan Lucic was 22. Brad Marchand, David Krejci, all really skilled players, some of whom would go on to be superstars. Still, maybe currently are superstars when we look at Brad Marchand in the latest Stanley Cup run with the Florida Panthers. But then you had the veterans. Mark Recchi, 43. Andrew Ferentz, 31. Zdeno Chara, Shane Knighty, Thomas Caberlet. All guys who have been around the block. They knew how to play the game. They have been on good teams. They've been on bad teams. When you get a mix of solid vets who get it, and you add that to good young players who are willing to learn and willing to take advice from these older guys, it's a great recipe for success. And you see all these teams that have young players, whether it's the Chicago Blackhawks, the San Jose Sharks, the Ottawa Senators, all these young teams, the Montreal Canadiens. The one thing that the GMs try to do, and everybody knows they're doing it, is you surround them with good vets who could instill good tendencies, who could be good role models for these young players, whether it's a Tyler Toffoli, a Nick Foligno, those types of players who you bring in, and hopefully their experience, their work ethic rubs off on the young guys. I know when I came into the league, I walked into the locker room, there was Owen Nolan, there was Mikko Koivu, there was Nick Schultz, older guys who I looked at and I went, oh, okay, yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you have a 20-year career in the NHL. Maybe Owen Nolan wasn't the prime example because the guy never stretched at all and barely lifted weights. He was just strictly a pure skilled hockey player who did it the old school way. But Nick Schultz worked his ass off every single day. You know, guys like that who weren't overly talented, but just willed it and they worked at it. And that's what the Bruins did. They brought these guys in. Ricky was an incredible talent, but at that time he was 43 years old. He worked his tail off. Andrew Ferentz, the same thing. Zdeno Chara, the same thing. Shane Knighty, I played with him. The guy was a beast in the locker room. They had no egos whatsoever. They were all happy for each other. And their top scorer, by the way, 62 points. 62 points in 80 games, their top scorer had Milan Lucic, just 22-year-old kid. Do you think the high-end guys cared who were making the bunch of money? No. Why? Because they were winning games. And they understood what it took to win. And they didn't care if they got their cookies. They just wanted to win. Oh, by the way, that culture that they instilled, they also beat the hell out of other teams. Milan Lucic had 121 penalty minutes and led the team with 62 points. They built that big bad Bruins reputation, and they loved it. They would go in, they would outscore you, and they would beat you up. I remember going into the Garden. I gotta take a little nip of my Crown Royal. Just let me have a little taste. I remember going into the Garden. It was, who were we going to fight tonight? Are we going to get ran through the walls? It was Lucic. It was Nathan Horton, my teammate from the Thorold Blackhawks. People forget how physical he was. It was Gregory Campbell. It was obviously Sean Thornton, Adam McQuaid, Zdeno Chara, all willing to fight, all willing to bury you through the boards. You never got a night off when you went into Boston. You knew what kind of game you were getting. And conversely, when they went into your barn, they tried to do the same thing. They tried to bury you through your own boards. That was the Boston Bruins. So they go through the season in 2011. I don't want to spend too much time on this one team because it gets a little long. We're already 16 minutes into this podcast, and I haven't gotten into 2012 yet. But they have an incredible season. They don't, win the President's Trophy by any means. I think they came 7th or 8th in the league, and they beat Vancouver in Game 7 to win the Cup. And everybody's happy. They were built for the playoffs. This wasn't a regular season team. This was a playoff team. They were balanced in scoring. All 4 lines scored. They were 5th in the league in scoring. When you look at a roster that doesn't have a superstar, that doesn't have a guy even close to a point per game, you go, wait a minute, how the heck did they finish 5th in the league in scoring? It's because they were balanced. All 4 lines scored. I remember lining up versus their 4th line. It was Dan Paille, it was Sean Thornton, and it was Gregory Campbell. And they were just as dangerous as their first line. It was amazing how balanced that team was. But as good as they were scoring, 5th in the league, they were stingy defensively. You had Tim Thomas. You had that defensive core that was just incredible, whether it was Wyden or Seidenberg or Chara or Ferentz or Johnny Boychuk or McQuaid. It was an incredible defense that didn't have, like we see today, the incredible puck-moving defenseman. They have it now in McAvoy. They had it in Torrey Krug, but when they won in 2011, it was just a great group of defensemen who played the right way. No one made mistakes. No one played out of their pocket, and they were really, really good. And that's the culture. They win. They play hard. They don't care how they win, whether it's 1-0 or whether it's 7-5. They just play to win the game. They were relentless, and they were exhausting to play against. There was a few teams in that era who I enjoyed playing against them, but I know the higher end guys didn't enjoy playing because you knew when you got the puck, you were being pasted through the boards. It was the Bruins, the St. Louis Blues, and the LA Kings. All 3 of those teams were just relentless in their attack, in their defense, in their forecheck. It was hard to play against those teams. Some people relish playing against those teams. Other people shied away where you get the flu and you just, I don't want to touch the puck. I don't want to go in the corner. I don't want to go into the physical areas. And you become spectators at that point. It's just because it's a hard game. It's a man's game. And that's the culture that the Boston Bruins built. But over the next 12 years, slowly but surely, that culture eroded. Whether it was players leaving, you win a Stanley Cup, you want more money, and you leave. Having to pay players to keep them, to big contracts, management changes. Those all things were a part of what we see today with the Boston Bruins, where it's a huge question mark. All right, Peter Chiarelli takes a lot of flack. I was not a huge fan of him. Obviously, he did great in Boston, goes to Edmonton, ruined the Edmonton Oilers, and just made one after another bad moves for the Edmonton Oilers. But when you look at his first tenure with the Boston Bruins, when he was introduced as the GM in 2006, it's really, really good. He did a very masterful job with this Boston Bruins roster. He took over a team that was terrible 3 years prior and rebuilt them in 3 years and had them second place in the league and primed for long-term success. And when he got there, mindful the roster had some talent on the roster. They had Kessel, they had Chara, they had Bergeron, so they had pieces when he arrived that you could build around. So this wasn't just the cupboards were bare when he got there. As most bad teams, you do get high draft picks, and then the GM eventually gets fired, and then a new GM comes in, and it's like, okay, I got something to work with. But what Peter Chiarelli did was he wasn't resigned to just regular season success. I think he saw a team that was good, and he added some good players, but wasn't going to win the Stanley Cup. And my age-old adage is, what are we doing this for? Are we doing this just to keep our job? Are we doing this just to make the playoffs? Or are we doing this to win the Stanley Cup? And you have to applaud Peter Chiarelli for when he took over the Bruins in 2006. Because, mind you, he was only the 8th GM in Boston Bruins history. They've had 9 GMs now. They've been a franchise for over 100 years, and they've had 9 GMs. That's incredible. When you look at other teams, I think I had 9 GMs when I was with the Sabres for 2 years. So the Bruins give their GMs some runway to build, and I think Chiarelli knew that. So in 2006, he starts to rebuild. He starts drafting, and this is the one knock on Peter Chiarelli. He is a terrible management of draft picks. All of his picks are terrible, for the most part. He just can't do it for whatever reason. He has one notable pick in his tenure with the Boston Bruins. That was Tyler Seguin. That's it. Of his whole, I think he was there for 9 years. That's the only pick where I look back and I go, oh, and I guess Dougie Hamilton. But we'll get to that. Those picks weren't even his. He was gifted those picks because of one of the trades he made. But let's get into the trades, because that's where he really shined, I feel like. Where he took this roster that was good in 2008, 2009, 2010. They were a good team. They were making the playoffs. They were consistently in the top 5 to 7 of the NHL at this time. But he wanted to win a Stanley Cup. And he made some tough decisions, and he had some foresight. Getting Andrew Ference and Chuck Kobasu, that was his first trade for Wayne Primo and Brad Stewart, the two big pieces when they got Joe Thornton. Traded them away and got Andrew Ference. Big piece of that Stanley Cup team. Getting Aaron Ward for Paul Mara. Aaron Ward, tertiary piece, but a good solid defenseman. Dennis Weidman for Brad Boyes. Brad Boyes was a good forward. Getting Dennis Weidman, then using him and flipping him for a big piece when we'll get to that later. Adam McQuaid for a 5th rounder. Seeing talent where a team really doesn't see it. Adam McQuaid, obviously, part of their Stanley Cup run. A huge piece. Good young defenseman. Maybe underrated. Shane Knighty for Brandon Buczynski. Getting that veteran piece in to just calm things down on the back end. A good 5'6" defenseman. Johnny Boychuk for Matt Hendricks. Matt Hendricks, a good 3rd or 4th line centerman. Great on the penalty kill. Great on the faceoff dot. A hard piece to let go. A player that fits in well with the Boston Bruins culture. But knowing the need for a physical defenseman on the back end who has a cannon of a shot and seeing value where other teams don't see value. Great pickup by Johnny Boychuk. And getting Mark Recchi. A veteran who knows how to play the right way. Who doesn't expect things. Who comes in and can just mentor the young kids, can maybe shine when he's put in certain situations, but just knows when to back off when he's not the guy. A great pick. And then, of course, the big trade. 3 years, making the playoffs. I think Peter Chiarelli took a long look at this roster and he said, we need to make a seismic change. And the big trade was Phil Kessel to the Toronto Maple Leafs. At this time, Phil Kessel was just coming into his own. He was a everybody knows Phil Kessel. An incredibly skilled goal scorer. That's it. He is a legitimate bona fide sniper. He can burn when he's going. He's got a cannon for a shot. He's got just a laser-locked skill. But there's the other side of the coin. Not too motivated. Obviously not a champion in the weight room. And just doesn't, maybe in Peter Chiarelli's eyes, have that killer instinct when it comes in the playoffs. When he traded him, he was a 21-year-old kid. Had just scored 36 goals in the NHL. It's hard to score goals in the NHL. This guy put up 36 as a 21-year-old. Those types of players you want to keep. Peter Chiarelli looked at this roster. He looked at what they had done in the last few years. And he made the very, very, very difficult decision. And what compounded this decision, he traded them to an interdivision rival, another Original Six team, who the Bruins battle year in and year out to the Toronto Maple Leafs. He gets 2 first-rounders and a second-rounder. Going back to Tyler Seguin, one of those picks that they got ended up being Tyler Seguin, second overall. The other pick that they got ended up being Dougie Hamilton. They make this trade, and 2 years later they win the Cup. This is like a huge win for the Boston Bruins. We obviously know they have the huge losses with the Joe Thornton trade. This is a massive seismic trade that I don't think Peter Chiarelli gets enough accolades for. Trading this guy for 2 first-rounders and a second, a huge gamble for this team, who was good at that time, a dangerous team. And then they win